Today we are continuing the Healing Our Images of God series that we began a couple of weeks ago. And on the first Sunday of May, we asked this question: is your image and my image of God one of fear or one of love? And last week we asked if our image was one of compassion or one of vengeance, especially when it comes to how we believe God views other people. Not how God views me or you, but, other people. But how about our beliefs about God when it does come to each one of us? Like that rather infamous tagline from the movie Jaws, Part 4, if you're old enough to remember that. This time, it's personal. Because could there really be a more personal question than this one that we probably all ask at one time or another? What is going to happen to me when I die? Will the God of my understanding grant me eternal reward or eternal punishment? We have to start in those first 2 weeks with those other two issues, fear versus love, compassion versus vengeance, because what we think about those has great power to shape how we answer our question for today. And if you were here over the last 2 Sundays, perhaps you remember the basic message of the interpretations of Scripture that I shared. That God is not a supreme being of punishment and vengeance, but of unconditional love and compassion. That just as a truly loving parent could never condemn their son or daughter to eternal torment, so neither is God able to condemn us to eternal torture. And if we need confirmation of this interpretation, then we really don't have to look any further than the parable we heard today from the Gospel of Luke about the prodigal son. Probably the most well-known story in all of human history. I'm guessing most of us are probably already familiar with the traditional interpretation of this tale about the wayward, disrespectful son who gains wisdom through failure and through suffering, who decides to return home with humility, to beg for enough forgiveness, that he might be treated at least as well as his father's hired workers. The Gospel of Luke tells us that as the prodigal son returned home, as he approached his childhood home, once he had made that decision to go back, that even while he was still a long way off, Luke tells us, even before he could say a single word of apology to anyone, his father ran out to meet him with great joy and welcomed him fully back into the fold with a big, joyful banquet that everyone was invited to. And of course, we probably know about the bitter older brother, the one who did no wrong, the one who was so angry at his sinful younger sibling who was getting all the attention from Dad. So angry, stop it. So angry that he refused to even go back in the house where the welcome back party was in full swing. But let's pause this morning, step back just a little bit from this traditional interpretation. Let's step away from this well-known, well-worn view of this story, because far from being about the prodigal son, who faces no consequences for his bad behavior, even before he repents, and far from being about the older brother mired in self-righteous anger and bitterness, this parable is really a great deal more about a character I call the desperately determined father. But if we want to really be able to see this different view clearly, then we have to step far enough back from it that we place ourselves in Jesus' day and listen with first century Middle Eastern ears, the ears of those who heard this parable when Jesus told it for the very first time. And to take that first step back in time, let's understand this first. Those who heard Jesus tell this parable for the first time, they were not listening for theological clues that would tell each one of them whether or not they were going to heaven or hell. They were Jewish, as was Jesus. And in Judaism then, as in Judaism now, heaven and hell are just not important concepts. They're just not. They've never been important. Focusing on the world to come is not the point. In Judaism, the whole point of being a human is to enjoy and celebrate the gift of life while working with God on something called tikkun olam, which means the repair of the world. This is a very, very different viewpoint than that of Christianity throughout most of its history. So right off the bat, in telling this parable, we know that Jesus was not telling a story about reward and about punishment. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Let's take another step back in time with this. Those first century listeners being taught by Jesus, they would have been shocked, I tell you, shocked and appalled, utterly appalled at the portrayal of the father figure, the desperately determined father in this story. Because in Jesus' day, the family patriarch was king. He did not usually get involved with emotional family matters like sibling rivalry. That was his wife's job. He would not even think of entertaining a son's outrageously disrespectful request for his inheritance before his father died, let alone hand it over to him to be sold outside of the family. But above all, he would never, ever, ever run out to greet any child for any reason, especially one who had dishonored him so terribly. And he would never, ever leave his place at the head of the table at his own banquet to go out and talk with his other son who refused to come in, which was an equally terrible insult to his father in front of all of his guests. But just look at the patriarch in Jesus' story. Not only is his wife clearly falling down on her job of managing her children, but he doesn't call her on the carpet for being an absentee mother. He doesn't slap his younger son into next week for daring to ask for his inheritance prematurely. In fact, he gives him half of the estate and allows this insolent youngest child to throw a for sale sign on it so everyone in the community could see the father's shame. And what does he do? What does he do when this kid comes slinking back home, broke and hungry, smelling like a pig trough? He drops everything and he runs. He runs down the road to greet him before the child has even uttered a single word of remorse. The Greek philosopher Aristotle said, "Great men never run in public." I don't think Aristotle would have thought very highly of our Mr. Patriarch in our story today. And in the end of this shocking story told by Jesus, it actually comes to this. The desperately determined father